The house at the top of Sycamore Hill had once been full of light. Every window, every doorway had echoed with laughter, the kind that lingered in corners even after the people had left the room. Now it stood silent. Grand still, but stripped of its warmth. The wide wraparound porch was swept clean, not a leaf or speck of dust in sight, and yet it felt abandoned. Olo. Nathaniel Cole, known to the world as Nate, sat on the top step, his shoulders hunched forward, his hands clasped between his knees. He wore a crisp navy button-down and gray slacks, the kind of outfit he had worn to board meetings and fundraising galas. But today, his face was unshaven, his eyes sunken, and his soul nowhere in sight. In front of him, under the pale shade of the porch awning, sat a small wooden coffin. It gleamed with the kind of finish you didn't expect to see on something so heartbreaking. Polished maple.
Silver handle. White satin lining inside, cradling something too small to comprehend.
Swaddled in a soft cotton blanket with tiny clouds embroidered along the edges was the body of his son, his only child. The baby who should have changed everything. And did. Just not the way anyone had imagined. 3 days earlier, everything had unraveled. Emily, his wife, had gone into labor at 38 weeks. It had been a healthy pregnancy, carefully monitored after a miscarriage the year before. They'd moved to this house precisely to build the kind of life they had once only dreamed about. Quiet. Safe.
A family home.
She had held his hand in the delivery room, her smile tired but radiant. "We're almost there," she had whispered. "You're going to be a dad, Nate."
And then the chaos started. Machine beeping.
Nurses rushing. A nurse shouting for a crash cart. He was forced out of the room as doctors swarmed around her. The door slammed in his face. 37 minutes later, a doctor emerged with hollow eyes and a bowed head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole," he said quietly. "Your wife suffered an amniotic fluid embolism. We tried everything, but we lost her." Nate hadn't even realized he was falling until he hit the linoleum floor. His hands clutched at nothing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And the baby?" he finally managed, though the words were choked and foreign. "He was born alive," the doctor replied. "But only for a few minutes. His heart gave out. We did everything we could." Everything. Everything. 2 lives gone in under an hour. His entire world reduced to silence and paperwork.
Death certificate. Hospital bill.
Sympathy cards left unopened. He had refused to send the baby to a funeral home. He didn't want strangers touching him. Didn't want a cold chapel or a shallow sermon from a man who didn't know them. Instead, he brought his son, Liam, home.
One last time.
The hospital hadn't argued. Nate Cole was still a powerful man, despite being shattered. A few calls, a few forms, and the coffin arrived by hearse the following morning. Now on the 3rd day, Nate hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. He just sat. The porch had once been Emily's favorite place. She'd sit out there with a book in one hand, tea in the other, watching the sun set behind the hills. She had always said this house would see their future, that it would watch their baby grow up. But the house was silent now. And Nate felt nothing but the constant ringing of grief in his ears. "What was the point of it all?" he murmured, his voice cracked and dry. "The money, the IPO, the stupid tech that no one even uses now. I built all this for what?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his thighs, staring into the open coffin. Liam's face was impossibly serene. No more than 6 pounds, his skin still pink, his eyelids gently closed. The nurses had combed what little hair he had. They dressed him in the soft white onesie Emily had picked out weeks ago. The one with the words "Hello, world," printed across the chest. The irony gutted him.
Hello, world. Goodbye, world. Somewhere down the hill, a dog barked.
A car drove by, its engine fading into the distance. Life went on. How dare it? He didn't notice the boy at first. Just a flicker of movement near the edge of the yard. Then a shadow by the fence. Bare feet stepping cautiously across the gravel path. The boy was small, maybe 8 or 9. Skinny. Black. His t-shirt hung off his shoulders like it belonged to someone twice his size. His shorts were threadbare. Dirt streaked his arms and legs. He moved slowly, eyes wide, fixed on the coffin.
Nat blinked.
Was he hallucinating? He rubbed his eyes, but the boy remained quiet, watching. The child edged closer. Not up the stairs, but just to the base of the porch.
Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, the boy spoke. Mystère.
I think your baby's breathing. Nate didn't respond at first. The words didn't register. They sounded like static in a storm.
The boy repeated, louder this time.
Your baby. He's breathing. Nate's head jerked up. What? I saw his chest move.
Just a little.
He's not dead. A strange surge passed through Nate, anger, disbelief, then something dangerously close to hope. He stood, too fast, his vision swimming. You're lying, he said. You don't. What are you even doing here? I didn't do nothing, sir. I saw him. He moved. Nate's breath caught in his throat. Against all logic, against everything the doctors had told him, he turned toward the coffin. He leaned in, heart pounding. And then he saw it. The slightest rise and fall of Liam's chest. A flutter. A breath. Another. Nate gasped. He stumbled back, his knees hitting the porch railing. Oh my God, he whispered. Oh my God, he's alive. He fumbled for his phone, hands shaking so hard he almost dropped it. 911, he shouted into the speaker the moment the call connected. My baby, he's alive. They said he was dead, but he's breathing. I need an ambulance. Now. Behind him, the boy stood motionless, eyes wide. Nate turned to him. You stay right there, he said, voice trembling.
Don't move.
And for the first time in 3 days, the emptiness in Nate's chest cracked.
Something sharp pierced through it.
Hope. Terrifying, fragile, electrifying hope. Jaden had learned early in life how to disappear. He knew which sidewalks to avoid so store managers wouldn't chase him off. He knew when to duck behind dumpsters when patrol cars rolled by. He knew that if he sat too long outside a bakery, even with his best sad eyes, someone would eventually tell him to move along. Kids like him, alone, homeless, unnoticed, weren't supposed to exist in plain sight. So he had learned to blend into the background, to move like a shadow through the world. That morning had started like any other. He'd woken up on the wooden bench outside the laundromat, stiff and cold. A thin blanket, half moldy, half holy, was still wrapped around his shoulders. His shoes didn't match. His backpack, barely zipped, held 2 apples he'd found in a donation bin, a cracked water bottle, and a comic book with the cover missing. He hadn't meant to walk up Sycamore Hill. The houses were too nice. Too clean. People up there didn't like seeing someone like him wandering near their driveways. But hunger had a way of silencing fear, and the rumor about the trash cans behind the cafe on the hill was too tempting to ignore. So Jaden had taken the long route. He was walking past the White House when he saw it. At first, it was just the porch that caught his attention.
Big, white step. A swing creaking in the breeze.
But then he saw the man. Sitting perfectly still. Eyes empty.
Like a statue made of skin.
And then the coffin. Jaden stopped in his tracks. He didn't want to be disrespectful. He had seen death before. He knew what coffins looked like. Sometimes, when churches in the city held funerals, they offered food afterward, and Jaden would sneak in through the side door to grab a sandwich or 2. But he'd never seen something like this.
A baby coffin. Out in the open.
In front of a house. The man hadn't moved. Not even a blink. Jaden felt the pull before he realized he was walking toward it. Something in his chest tightened. He stepped off the sidewalk, through the wooden gate, and crept closer, slow, cautious, unsure why he felt drawn. When he reached the edge of the porch, he could see inside.
A baby.
Tiny. Wrapped in a blanket with little clouds on it. His face was peaceful, almost too still. But Jaden had lived in enough shelters, seen enough newborns, to know what a sleeping baby looked like. This didn't look like sleep. And then, just as he was about to turn away, it happened. The blanket fluttered. A soft movement. So subtle it could have been wind, if not for the way the baby's chest lifted, once then again. Jaden's eyes widened. He blinked hard, rubbed his arm, and stared again. Yes. There it was. Breathing. The baby was breathing. He looked up at the man, still unmoving. Jaden hesitated. Should he say something?
What if the man got angry?
What if he called the cops? But this wasn't the kind of thing you kept to yourself. Someone needed to know. He took a shaky breath.
Mystère.
I think your baby's breathing. The man didn't react. Jayden took a step closer, his voice firmer this time. Your baby, he's alive. That's when the man finally looked up. Sharp, broken eyes snapped to Jayden. There was confusion there. Anger. Pain. What? I saw him move, Jayden said. He's breathing. Look. Jayden stepped back as the man jumped to his feet and rushed to the coffin. He watched as the man leaned over, froze, then gasped. Jayden didn't understand everything that happened after that. The man, Nate, though Jayden wouldn't know his name until later, was shouting into his phone, stumbling, crying. Sirens started wailing in the distance minutes later. Jayden backed away instinctively, just far enough to be out of reach if anyone started yelling. He'd been through this before. Good deed or not, he knew how people reacted to kids like him hanging around places they didn't belong. But no one yelled. No one saw him. When the ambulance arrived, Jayden stepped behind the porch pillar, out of sight but still watching. 2 paramedics jumped out, carrying gear. One of them took the baby. The other asked the man questions in hushed tones. Jayden couldn't hear the answers. The man got into the ambulance with them. Then they were gone. And the porch was quiet again. Jayden lingered. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he wanted to make sure the baby would be okay. Or maybe, deep down, he just wanted to feel connected to something, anything, for more than a passing second. He sat on the bottom step, hugging his knees to his chest. That baby. He looked so small. So fragile. But he'd been alive. Breathing. How could someone have missed that? Jayden knew the answer. People didn't see what they didn't want to see. It was easier that way. Easier to say someone was gone than to hope they might still be here. Easier to walk past a homeless kid on the street than to wonder what his story might be. He had lived his whole life that way. Unseen.
Unirde.
But today, for once, he had seen something that mattered.
Something real.
He had done something. He just didn't know what would come next. Time passed. Jayden didn't have a watch, but he guessed it had been over an hour. The sun had moved higher in the sky. His stomach growled, but he stayed where he was. Eventually the ambulance returned, not with sirens, but quietly.
À différents coups.
They removed the coffin. Carried it out gently. There was no baby inside. Jayden felt something twist in his chest. He wondered where they were now.
The man and the baby.
He hoped the baby was okay. That he would make it. That his breath wouldn't stop again. He knew better than to expect a thank you. That wasn't why he had said anything. He stayed on the step until the sun began to drop toward the hills. Then he got up, adjusted his backpack, and turned to walk back toward the city. He had places to go, none of them permanent. He had food to find, warmth to chase. But he would remember this place. The White House on Sycamore Hill.
The baby in the cloud blanket. The man with broken eyes.
And the breath that changed everything. The ambulance lights vanished down the winding road as Nate sat hunched in the back, gripping the edge of the gurney where Liam now lay. The paramedics worked quickly, one adjusting the oxygen flow while the other monitored his heart rate and pulse. The numbers were low, frighteningly low, but they were there.
Not flatline.
Not silence. Nate couldn't stop staring at his son's face. There was color in his cheeks. Barely any, but enough to make his heart pound with something he had forgotten existed, hope.
Ange routing.
It trembled inside him like glass balancing on a ledge. He kept looking at Liam, afraid to blink.
Afraid it might vanish again, like a dream.
You're doing okay, buddy, he whispered, though his voice cracked.
You're hanging in there.
When they arrived at the emergency wing of St. Agnes Medical Center, a team of neonatal specialists was already waiting. The doors burst open, and the paramedics rolled Liam straight in. Nate tried to follow, but a nurse held up a hand. We need a few minutes, Mr. Cole. The doctors will update you as soon as possible. Nate staggered back into a seat, hands trembling, breaths shallow. Everything was moving so fast now. He looked down at his shirt, still stained with dirt from the porch, his sleeves rolled unevenly. He felt unmoored, like time itself had detached from reality. But something kept tugging at the edge of his mind. A voice.
Small, firme, insiste.
Your baby, he's breathing. He looked toward the ER entrance, but Jayden was nowhere to be seen. Had he run off? Nate had told him to stay. Told him not to move. But of course he ran. He was just a kid.
Askerdoine, had det.
Guilt twisted in Nate's stomach. The boy had been right. And yet, his first instinct had been to shut him down.
Tout accuse.
To dismiss. You're lying, he had said. Get away. The memory burned. He closed his eyes, letting the hospital sounds wash over him.
The beeping machine.
The overhead announcements. The hurried steps of nurses. For the first time in 3 days, he wasn't drowning in silence. But the noise didn't bring comfort. It only made him feel more aware of how little control he had left. Nate stood and began pacing the hallway. He remembered the look in Jayden's eyes when he first approached, uncertain, cautious, but honest. And his voice hadn't wavered. Not once. I saw him move. He's breathing. How had he missed that? How had all the doctors missed it? He pulled out his phone and dialed the hospital's main desk. I need to find someone, he said. A child. He was just here, African-American boy, around 8 or 9 years old. He was the one who noticed my son was breathing. Was he brought in by ambulance?
No.
He was just there.
Au-dessus de Mayaos.
I told him to stay, but I think he ran off. I'm sorry, sir. We don't have any records of an unaccompanied minor fitting that description. Nate ended the call and rubbed his forehead. He didn't even know the boy's name. He sat again, this time pulling out a pen and an old receipt from his wallet. He scribbled down everything he remembered: appearance, clothes, approximate age, voice, even the worn-out sneakers the kid had been wearing. It wasn't much, but it was something. 2 hours passed. A doctor finally approached. Middle-aged, calm, wearing the kind of expression that suggested experience with both miracles and disasters. Mr. Cole, he said, I'm Dr. Hayes, the attending neonatologist. Your son is stable for now. For now. Nate echoed. He's suffering from severe neonatal cardiac insufficiency. He was born with a structural heart defect, something called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. It's rare, but very serious. Is he going to make it? Dr. Hayes hesitated, then chose his words carefully. We've got him breathing on his own now. That's a good sign. But he'll need surgery, likely multiple procedures over time. We're preparing for the first operation now. It's urgent, but risky. Without it, he won't survive the week.
Natsat frozen. What are the chances?
It's hard to say. Depends on how he responds to the first surgery. But,
Monsieur Cole, I'm going to be honest with you.
These procedures are complex, and while we've seen success, they don't always work. Nate nodded slowly. He didn't have a choice. There was no time to spiral. Do it, he said.
Do whatever it takes.
The doctor nodded and walked away, leaving Nate alone again with his racing thoughts. By the time he stepped outside, the sun had already started to fall below the trees. Shadows stretched long across the hospital courtyard. And there, sitting on a concrete bench, was Jayden. He was hugging his backpack, legs swinging slightly above the ground. His head was down, but when Nate approached, he looked up. I didn't go far, he said. Nate paused.
You came back.
Jayden shrugged. Didn't know where else to go. Nate sat beside him, keeping a few inches of space between them. I owe you everything, he said. I didn't believe you. I almost didn't check. Jayden didn't respond right away. Then, most people don't believe me. They look at me like I'm trying to trick them. I looked at you that way. And I was wrong. Jayden tilted his head. Is your baby okay? He's alive. Thanks to you. He's got a long road ahead, but he's fighting. A moment of silence passed. Jayden's eyes stayed on the ground. You got a place to stay? Nate asked gently. Jayden hesitated. Sometimes I sleep at the shelter on 4th Street, but they fill up fast. If I don't get in line early, they give my spot to someone else. So, sometimes I don't.
Nat stared at the boy, at twisting.
How had the system failed so badly? How could a kid like this slip through every crack? Well, Nate said slowly, if you don't have anywhere to go tonight, maybe you could come back with me.
Just for now.
Just to get warm. Some food. A bed. Jaden's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why? Because you saved my son, Nate said, and I don't think anyone should be out here alone. Jaden looked away again, chewing on his bottom lip. I'm not good with people, he said finally. They usually don't want me around. Well, I'm not good with people either, Nate replied. But maybe we could be not good with people together.
Just for one night.
Jaden didn't answer, but he didn't run, either. And when Nate stood and offered his hand, after a long moment, Jaden took it. The road back to the house felt longer this time. Nate drove in silence, his hand steady on the wheel despite the storm inside him. Beside him, Jaden sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching his backpack with both arms. He didn't ask questions, didn't glance at the dashboard or the trees blurring past the windows. He just stared ahead, eyes blank, like he was waiting for this all to disappear. Nate wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't even sure what he was doing. 1 minute he'd been preparing for his son's funeral, the next he was driving a stranger's child, no, not a stranger anymore, back to the place where everything had fallen apart.
You hungry?
Nate asked after a while. Jaden nodded without looking at him. I've got some food at the house. It's probably not exciting.
Sandwich, soup, stuff like that.
That's fine. Do you have any allergies? Jaden gave him a sideways glance. I don't think so. Never had enough to find out. Nate didn't know how to respond to that, so he kept driving. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch was still exactly as they had left it. Empty. Clean. Deceptively peaceful. The swing rocked slightly in the breeze, as if it had been waiting for someone to return. Jaden stepped out of the car slowly, his eyes scanning the space with caution. Nate unlocked the front door and gestured him inside. The interior of the house was dim, the afternoon sun casting long beams across the hardwood floors. Everything was pristine, well-furnished, modern, expensive, but lifeless.
Like a stage set without actor.
The kind of house you could walk through without touching anything.
Jaden stood just inside the doorway, hésitant.
His feet stayed planted on the welcome mat. You can come in, Nate said gently. Really? Jaden stepped in, still clutching his backpack.
You want to shower first?
Or eat? Jaden looked torn. I guess food? Nate nodded and led him to the kitchen. He made grilled cheese and tomato soup, the way Emily used to on cold evenings. Jaden sat at the kitchen island, watching closely but saying little. When the food was placed in front of him, he didn't dig in right away. He waited. Looked at Nate. Is this okay? He asked.
Nat blinked.
Of course it's okay.
It's for you.
Jaden gave a small nod and started eating. Slowly at first, then faster, as if realizing no one was going to snatch the plate away. Nate sat across from him, nursing a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. He tried not to stare but couldn't help watching the way Jaden moved, tense, economical, like someone who'd spent his life preparing to flee at any moment.
You always on your own?
Nate asked. Jaden shrugged. Since I was 7. What happened? Jaden hesitated, then took a sip of soup. Gas explosion. Apartment building in Northside. My mom and dad were inside. I was outside playing. Nate's heart skipped. The name of the neighborhood slammed into him like a wave.
Northside.
That building. His building. I think I remember that, he said carefully. They said it was faulty pipes, Jaden continued. No one really told me much after that. Just kept moving me around. Nate nodded slowly, throat tight. He had been on the board at the time. A multi-unit development approved with hasty inspections. The project manager had cut corners, rushing to meet investor deadlines. There had been warnings, but Nate had been too distracted by a product launch to investigate. When the explosion happened, his team settled fast, paid out damages, and buried the story beneath layers of bureaucracy. He hadn't thought about it in years. And now, here was the consequence. Sitting at his kitchen table. Jaden wiped his mouth with his sleeve.
Why did you bring me here?
You saved my son, Nate said simply. That's not something I take lightly. Jaden looked at him. I didn't do it for a reward. I know. But I owe you more than food and a bed. I
don't want you out there alone tonight.
Or any night, if I can help it. Jaden didn't respond. He stared down at the crusts of his sandwich. Nate stood and grabbed a fresh towel from the hall closet. Come on.
Let's get you cleaned up.
He showed Jaden to the guest room, which Emily had decorated in soft blues and grays. It had been meant for her sister, who visited often, but now it stood untouched, quiet. Nate laid the towel on the bed and pointed to the bathroom. There's soap, shampoo, whatever you need. Clean clothes are in the dresser. They might be a bit big, but they're better than nothing. Jaden gave a small nod and disappeared into the bathroom. While he showered, Nate walked through the house slowly, touching furniture he hadn't noticed in weeks. The living room still had Emily's books scattered on the shelf. A sweater draped over the back of a chair. Her scent faintly lingered in the hallway. And then his phone rang. It was the hospital. He answered on the first ring.
Monsieur Cole, this is Doctor A.
We've stabilized Liam's vitals. He's still fragile, but he's responding well to the oxygen and medication. We'd like to proceed with the surgery tomorrow morning. Nate closed his eyes. Tomorrow. Yes. He's not strong enough for a full repair, but we can do the first stage procedure. If it goes well, we'll follow up in a few weeks. Nate's voice was hoarse. Do it. Whatever he needs. After he hung up, he sat down at the foot of his bed and buried his face in his hands. It was happening so fast. And yet, for the first time since Emily died, he wasn't numb. He felt everything. Grief. Guilt. Fear. But also something else. Purpose. Jaden emerged from a hallway minutes later, wearing one of Nate's old hoodies that nearly swallowed him whole and a pair of sweatpants rolled at the ankles. Thanks, he mumbled. Nate looked up. You clean up well. Jaden gave a ghost of a smile, then looked toward the front door.
You think the baby's gonna be okay?
Nate nodded. I think. I hope. We'll know more after surgery. Jaden hesitated. Can I go see him?
You want to? I don't know.
I never really got to say hi. Nate stood.
Then come with me.
Together, they left the quiet house and stepped into the night, two strangers bound by a baby's breath and the chance to make something right. They didn't know it yet, but neither of them would be alone again. The hallway outside the pediatric cardiac unit was bathed in artificial light, the sterile white glow doing nothing to soften the weight pressing down on Nate's chest. He sat in a hard-backed chair, elbows on his knees, staring through the glass window of the observation room where Liam slept beneath a tangle of wires and blinking monitors. Jaden sat beside him, quieter than usual, fingers curled tightly around the frayed strap of his backpack. He hadn't asked any more questions, but he didn't need to. His eyes flicked between Nate and the room beyond, searching for answers that Nate didn't yet have.
The silence stretched.
I used to think hospitals were safe places, Jaden said, not looking at Nate. Like, if something bad happened, you came here and it got fixed. Nate glanced at him. And now? I think it's just where people wait for bad news. Nate didn't know how to respond. Not because Jaden was wrong, but because he understood. Too well. Inside the room, Liam's chest rose and fell with mechanical rhythm, assisted by a ventilator. His tiny fists lay limp by his sides. The 4 lines feeding into his wrists looked too big for such small veins. Nate had spent his life solving problems. He had built an empire on it. People brought him inefficiencies, design failures, user complaints, and he created answers. But here, none of his skills mattered. His wealth bought him access, maybe speed, but not certainty. Not life. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. Jaden shifted beside him. Why are you doing this? The boy asked. Doing what?
Letting me stay.
Feeding me.
Letting me see your son.
Nate hesitated. He thought about brushing it off, giving a simple answer, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way Jaden was looking at him, curious, cautious, like he'd heard too many lies before and was trying to measure the truth in Nate's eyes. So Nate told the truth. Because you did something that no one else did, he said.
You saw Liam.
You noticed. I didn't. The doctors didn't. But you did. Jayden looked down at his shoes. I didn't know if I should say anything. I thought, maybe he really was gone. And I was just being stupid.
You weren't.
I've seen dead before, Jayden said flatly. At the shelter.
On the street.
I know what it looks like. His voice was too calm for a child that young. Nate felt something stir in his chest, a mix of grief and anger and guilt. You said your parents died in an explosion, Nate said slowly. Jayden nodded once. In Northside. Another nod. What year? 2 years ago. I think. It was summer. Nate's stomach turned. He already knew the answer, but he had to be sure.
What building?
Jayden's voice dropped.
White Pinet appartement. 3rd floor.
Nate closed his eyes. He remembered every detail. The news coverage. The legal documents. The engineer's reports. A gas leak due to corroded piping. An internal maintenance request had been filed months earlier but never escalated. Somewhere along the chain, someone hadn't followed up. Someone had cut corners. And at the top of that chain, Nate. He had been too busy closing a funding round for his second app launch. The apartment building had been just one of many low-income properties folded into the portfolio of a subsidiary he barely tracked anymore. After the explosion, his legal team had moved quickly. Settlements were paid out. Public statements were issued. Apologies were drafted with corporate polish. But he had never once looked into the faces of those affected. Until now.
Jayden.
A child who had slipped through the cracks. The cracks Nate had helped create. I was responsible, Nate said quietly. Jayden blinked. For what?
For White Pinet. For the building.
My company owned it. Jayden stared at him. I didn't know, Nate continued.
Not until tonight.
But I should have.
I should have known everything.
I should have made sure it was safe. I didn't. Jayden's face was unreadable. People said it was just an accident, he said slowly. That things like that happen. Maybe, Nate said. But sometimes things happen because people like me stop paying attention. They sat in silence again, longer this time. Jayden's fingers tightened around his backpack. So now what? You feel bad and want to make it up by feeding me grilled cheese.
The word weren't cruel.
Just honest.
Nat let them land.
No, he said. I want to start by telling the truth. And then, maybe if you'll let me, I want to make sure you're not alone anymore. Jayden didn't respond.
Inside the room, Liam stirred.
A faint twitch of his fingers. The door opened behind them, and Dr. Hayes stepped into the hallway. He looked tired but composed. We've scheduled the surgery for 6 a.m. tomorrow, he said. It's the first stage of the Norwood procedure. It's complex, but we've done it before. The risks are significant, but so is the potential for success. Nate stood.
He'll be here.
The doctor nodded. We'll prep him in a few hours. You should get some rest. Nate didn't move. Mr. Cole, the doctor added, you may want to make any necessary preparations. Just in case.
Nates briscocht.
The weight of the phrase settled like lead in his chest. I understand, he said. After the doctor left, Nate turned to Jayden. You don't have to stay, he said. I know this is a lot. Jayden didn't answer at first. He looked at Liam, then back at Nate. You think he'll make it?
I don't know.
Jayden's jaw clenched. I hope he does. He didn't even get a chance. Neither of them spoke after that. They stayed at the hospital through the night. Nate sat in a reclining chair outside the OR, his eyes fixed on the swinging doors where Liam would be wheeled through in a few hours. Jayden curled up in the corner, his hoodie pulled over his head, not sleeping, just existing in the quiet. And as the hours passed, as machines beeped and nurses moved like ghosts through the corridors, Nate couldn't stop thinking. Of the baby who had been mistaken for dead. Of the boy who had been forgotten by everyone, including him. And of the life he had built, how high the walls had been, how fragile the foundation, how much he had ignored along the way. Now, with one son fighting to survive and another boy slowly stepping into his heart, Nate knew this wasn't just about redemption. It was about responsibility.
Une seconde chance.
And whether he had the courage to take them.
Down broke slowly over the city, soft light bleeding into the hospital corridor.
The waiting room outside the pediatric operating theater was nearly empty, save for Nate and Jaden, who had barely moved through the night. A nurse had brought them coffee and fruit at some point, but neither had touched it. At exactly 6 a.m., the double doors opened and Liam was wheeled out of the NICU, encased in a clear plastic bassinet surrounded by machines and wires. His face looked impossibly small beneath the oxygen mask, and for a moment, Nate felt his chest seize. The surgical team moved quickly. They didn't speak to him, but one of the nurses gave him a small, firm nod. Then they were gone. The doors swung shut behind them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jaden stood, stretching his legs. He hadn't said much since last night, not after Nate's confession. He hadn't asked for more details. He hadn't run, either. But there was a new tension in his shoulders, in the way he kept his distance. Nate didn't blame him. He sat back down, staring at the floor tiles, wondering what the hell he was supposed to say now. After a while, Jaden broke the silence. "So what happened after the explosion?" he asked. "To the people?" Nate looked up. Some were relocated. Others received settlement checks. It wasn't enough. I know that now. Jaden's jaw tightened.
He never got anything.
Nobody ever called.
Nobody came looking for me.
"I'm not surprised," Nate said quietly. "You were just a name in a report to the people handling the case. A child placed in temporary care.
The system failed you.
And I didn't even know to ask." Jaden crossed his arms. "You had people to handle it." "Yes," Nate admitted. "And I let them."
D'étaient sans me.
Jaden turned away, walking toward the window. The morning sun cast long lines across his face. "I kept waiting for someone to tell me it was a mistake," he said. "That my parents weren't really gone. That they'd show up and say it was all a misunderstanding." "I know what it feels like to wait for someone who isn't coming back," Nate said. Jaden didn't reply. "I can't undo what happened," Nate continued. "But I can promise this, I won't look away again."
Not from you.
Not from what matters. Jaden still didn't turn around. The hours crept by. Every time the surgical wing doors opened, Nate's heart leapt, only to fall again when it wasn't the doctor. He kept checking the clock, but it seemed to be deliberately slowing, stretching each minute into an hour. At noon, Dr. Hayes finally returned. His scrubs were stained, his expression serious but not grim. Nate stood before he even realized it. "How is he?" "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," Hayes said. "Liam is in recovery now. He'll need to be closely monitored, but he made it through the most critical phase." Nate's knees nearly gave out. He reached for the armrest of the nearest chair and sank down, exhaling a breath that felt like it had been stuck in his chest for days. "Thank you," he managed. "He's strong," Hayes said. "But it's a long road. He'll need additional surgeries as he grows, and the next few days are crucial." Nate nodded, his eyes wet. "Can I see him?" "In a little while. We're stabilizing him now. I'll let you know as soon as you can go in." When the doctor left, Nate buried his face in his hands. Jaden sat beside him, quieter than ever. "He made it," Nate whispered. "Yeah," Jaden said. "He did." They left the hospital late that afternoon. Nate had insisted Jaden come home to rest. The boy hadn't resisted, but he hadn't said much either. The drive was quiet, the radio off, the only sound the soft hum of the engine and the occasional hiss of tires against the pavement. Back at the house, Nate led Jaden into the kitchen and made them both sandwiches. Jaden took his to the living room and sat cross-legged on the couch. He ate slowly, chewing each bite with mechanical precision. Nate sat across from him. After a while, Nate stood and crossed to the bookshelf near the fireplace. He pulled down a slim file, one he had retrieved that morning from his home office. It was a copy of the internal investigation report from White Pines. Something he had forced himself to read the night before. He handed it to Jaden.
What is this?
Jaden asked, setting his plate down. Everything I didn't want to know 2 years ago, Nate said. Details about the explosion. The ignored warnings. The names of the residents. Your name. Jayden opened the file slowly. His eyes scanned the pages, stopping at the list of tenants. His fingers trembled as he reached the entry for his parents, Terrence and Alicia Moore. Apartment 3B. I didn't know your name until yesterday, Nate said. But now I'll never forget it. Jayden's eyes stayed on the page. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve to see it. You deserve the truth. Jayden's voice was low. I used to think all rich people were the same. Didn't care who got hurt as long as they got their money. That's not far from the truth, Nate admitted. At least, it wasn't for me. Jayden closed the folder and set it aside. I don't know if I forgive you, he said. You don't have to, Nate replied. That's not why I brought you here. I just didn't want to keep lying, especially not to you. Jayden looked at him then, for the first time all day. Why me? He asked. You could have just said thank you and sent me back to the shelter. Nate's voice was steady.
Because I see you now.
And I can't unsee you. They sat in silence again, this time less heavy, more uncertain. Later that night, Nate showed Jayden the guest room again. Fresh sheets, a clean towel, a small night light glowing in the corner. The room still smelled faintly of lavender, Emily's favorite scent.
You okay here?
Nate asked. Jayden nodded. Nate turned to leave, then paused. If you ever want to talk, he said, about anything.
I'll be here.
Jayden looked up at him, eyes unreadable. Okay. Nate nodded and pulled the door closed behind him. In his own room, Nate lay awake long after midnight. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about Liam, about Jayden, about the impossible chain of events that had brought them together. None of it made sense. And yet, in some quiet part of his soul, it felt like something had shifted. Like maybe, just maybe, the pieces were beginning to realign. He didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in a long time, he wanted to find out.
The next morning, the house on Sycamore, il stirred with un familiar rythme.
Nate stood in the kitchen, bleary-eyed, staring at the coffee pot as it gurgled through its brewing cycle. He hadn't slept much, but it didn't matter. His thoughts had been too full, of Liam, of Jayden, of the way his world had shifted almost violently in the span of a few days.
From upstairs came the muffled sound of footsteps.
Jayden was awake. A moment later, the boy appeared in the kitchen doorway, still dressed in the oversized hoodie and sweatpants Nate had loaned him. His hair was damp, and a towel hung around his shoulders. Morning, Nate said, pouring coffee into a mug. Jayden nodded. Hey.
I made toast.
There's peanut butter and jelly on the counter. Plates are in the cabinet to your right. Jayden moved with caution, still unfamiliar with the space. He reached for a plate, careful not to touch anything else, and sat at the kitchen island. He spread the peanut butter slowly, methodically. I'm going back to the hospital after breakfast, Nate said. Liam's in recovery, but I want to be there when he wakes up. Jayden didn't look up.
Can he come?
The question took Nate by surprise, not because he didn't want Jayden there, but because the boy sounded almost hesitant, like he didn't expect to be allowed. Of course, Nate said.
I'd like that.
They ate in silence. Outside, the sun began to climb over the ridge, casting gold light across the porch.
A breeze moved through the open window, stirring the curtain. Nat glanced at Jayden. You ever go to school?
Jayden shrugged. Off and on. Mostly when the shelters made me.
I guess I'm behind.
We'll figure that out.
When you're ready. Jayden glanced up. You mean, like, I'd keep living here?
Nate nodded slowly. That's what I'm hoping. Jayden looked back down at his toast. People don't usually keep me around that long. Well, I'm not people, Nate said. And this isn't about charity. It's about what's right. Jayden didn't respond, but something in his posture softened. At the hospital, Liam was still asleep, but the doctors were optimistic. His vital signs were stronger, his breathing more regular. The surgical team had done their job. Now it was up to Liam to keep fighting. Nate stood at the edge of the NICU, watching his son through the glass. Jayden stood beside him, his hands stuffed into his hoodie pocket, eyes fixed on the monitors. He looks better, Jayden said quietly. He does. You think he knows you're here? I think he knows he's not alone. That night, back at the house, Nate pulled a set of sheets from the linen closet and started making up the guest room again. Jayden had offered to do it himself, but Nate had insisted. You've done enough the past few days, he said.
Let me take care of something for once.
Jayden stood in the doorway, watching. Most people don't make beds for me, he said. Usually it's just a cot or whatever's left. Well, this one has a memory foam mattress, Nate said. It's not fancy, but it won't destroy your back.
Jayden craqued a small smile.
What's memory foam? It remembers the shape of your body. Helps with support. Jayden raised an eyebrow.
Sounds weird.
It is. But you'll like it. After the bed was finished, they moved to the living room. Nate turned on a movie, something animated and lighthearted, but they both ended up watching more of the ceiling than the screen. At one point, Jayden asked, was it always like this?
Your house, I mean.
So quiet. Not when Emily was here, Nate said. She talked to everything. The plants, the cat, the oven. You had a cat? Briefly. It didn't like me. Jayden grinned.
I believe that.
Nate looked over. You do. Yeah.
You're kind of intense.
Nate laughed, the sound catching him off guard. Jayden didn't laugh, but he smiled again.
A real one this time.
Later that week, after a follow-up with Dr. Hayes confirmed Liam's stable recovery, Nate took Jayden downtown to buy him some new clothes. Not just necessities, but things Jayden got to choose. Shirts, jeans, sneakers that actually fit. The boy was overwhelmed at first, clearly unused to being asked what he wanted. But eventually, he began to open up. At a small diner near the corner of 8th and Pine, they ate burgers and fries, and Nate finally asked what had been on his mind for days. If I talked to the right people, he said, would you be open to staying with me? Not just for now. Permanently. Jayden stopped chewing.
Like adoption?
Yes. Jayden stared at him. You don't even know me. I'm getting to know you. And what I know already.
I care about.
Jayden wiped his hands on a napkin.
What if I mess it up?
Then we deal with it. Together.
Jayden leaned back in the booth, eyes searching Nate's face. What if you change your mind?
I won't, Nate said. I've changed my mind about a lot of things in my life. But not this. Jayden didn't answer right away. But he didn't say no. That night, back at the house, Jayden walked into the kitchen where Nate was rinsing dishes. I want to try, he said. Nate turned. Try what? Staying. Being part of whatever this is. Nate nodded, too choked up to speak. Jayden added, but I want my own toothbrush. Not a spare one. Mine. Nate smiled. Done. And a key. Also done. They didn't hug. They weren't there yet. But they didn't need to. Later, as Nate stood on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the night settle over the hills, he thought about how strange it was, the way life had cracked open and let something new in. It hadn't happened gently. It hadn't followed any plan. But somehow, amid grief and guilt, something good had started growing. Inside, Jayden's voice drifted from the living room, where he was on the phone with a caseworker. No, I'm safe, he was saying.
I'm with Someone Woolisten.
Nate turned his face toward the stars. This wasn't the life he had built. It wasn't the one he had earned. But it was the one he had now. And for the first time, he felt like it might just be the one he was meant to live. Spring arrived quietly in the hills above the city. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and the trees along Sycamore Hill began to bloom with white and pink blossoms. Inside the house, however, the warmth of the season was overshadowed by a single looming reality. Liam's next surgery was approaching. 3 weeks had passed since the initial operation. The first hurdle had been cleared, and Liam had responded better than expected. But Dr. Hayes had been clear, the Norwood procedure was only the beginning. The second stage, the Glen procedure, would take place soon, and with it came another wave of risk. Nate found himself oscillating between cautious hope and creeping dread. Every day, he visited the hospital, sat beside Liam's incubator, read to him from the children's books Emily had once bought, and whispered about the world waiting outside. He spoke to him not as a fragile newborn tethered to machines, but as a boy he fully expected to grow up, run barefoot through the yard, and one day ask about the strange scar on his chest. Jayden came most days, too, though he rarely stayed long. He said little when they were there, instead sitting silently, eyes fixed on Liam with a look that Nate couldn't quite define. It wasn't fear or sadness exactly, but something older. Like Jayden was preparing for an ending he had known too many times before. One afternoon, after the hospital visit, they sat in the car in the parking lot, windows down, breeze brushing against their arms. Nate watched Jayden trace a circle on the dashboard with his thumb. "You've been quiet lately," Nate said. Jayden shrugged.
Just thinking.
About what? Jayden hesitated. What happens if it doesn't work?
If Liam doesn't make it.
Nate looked away. The question hit harder because it was the one he kept asking himself. "We hope it does," he said eventually.
We trust the doctor.
"We give him every chance." Jayden nodded, but his voice was flat. "That's not an answer." Nate turned back to him. "I don't have a better one. I wish I did." Jayden stared out the window. "I never got to say goodbye to my parents." "Not really. I keep thinking about that." "You won't have to say goodbye to Liam," Nate said.
You can't promise that.
"No," Nate admitted. "I can't. But I can promise we'll face whatever happens together." Jayden didn't reply, but he stayed in the car with him until the sun started to set. Back at the house, the tension settled into the walls. Every sound seemed louder.
Every moment felt like a countdown.
Nate spoke to lawyers, filed more paperwork regarding Jayden's temporary guardianship, and had conversations with social workers that ranged from supportive to skeptical. There were still hurdles ahead. Legal ones.
Emotional ones.
But he kept going. The night before the surgery, Nate stood in Liam's hospital room, watching the boy sleep. His tiny chest rose and fell beneath the blanket. The monitors blinked steadily, and for once, the room felt almost peaceful. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of Emily, holding her pregnant belly, taken just 2 weeks before she died. Her smile was radiant, her eyes full of life. "I wish you could see him now," Nate whispered. "He's stronger than I ever expected. Just like you." Jayden was waiting in the hallway when Nate stepped out. The boy looked tired, but he stood straighter than usual. "You ready?" Nate asked. Jayden nodded. "As I'll ever be." They walked to the car together, silent until they reached the parking lot. As Nate unlocked the door, Jayden spoke up.
"Can I tell you something?"
"Of course." Jayden looked at him, his eyes clear, steady. I think you should go through with the adoption papers. For real.
If that is something you want."
Nate paused, the key still in the door. "It is," he said. "Very much." Jayden looked away. "I don't want to end up somewhere else if something happens. I don't want to go back to bouncing around." "You won't," Nate said firmly. Jayden nodded again. "Okay." They drove home without another word, but something unspoken settled between them.
Acquier agrément. A shared understanding.
The house was no longer just Nate's. It was theirs now, in all the complicated, imperfect ways families came together. The morning of the surgery, the hospital felt colder than usual. Liam was prepped early. Nate kissed his son's forehead and watched as the surgical team rolled him away. Jayden stood beside him, a hand gripping the edge of Nate's coat. Dr. Hayes met them in the hallway. His tone was calm but serious. "This procedure will reconfigure the way Liam's heart circulates blood.
It's delicate.
There are risks of bleeding, infection, arrhythmia. We've done our best to prepare. Now we wait." Nate nodded. "Thank you." The hours that followed were some of the longest of Nate's life. He paced the waiting room. He sat. He stood.
Et drank bad coffee.
Jayden sat in a chair by the window, legs drawn up to his chest, hood pulled over his head. At one point, Nate stepped outside to get air. The hospital courtyard was empty, save for an older woman sitting on a bench with a Bible in her lap. She didn't speak, just looked at him with the kind of gaze that seemed to understand things words couldn't touch. He sat down across from her. "Waiting?" she asked. He nodded. My grandson had surgery here last year, she said. 2 days in the ICU. He's fine now. Playing baseball again. That's good, Nate said. You have to believe in something, she said. Even if it's just the next heartbeat. Nate looked down at his hands.
Déteste the hardest part.
She smiled gently. Then it's the part that matters most. When he returned inside, Jayden was still sitting in the same position. Nate sat beside him. You okay? I'm trying to be. Me too. They waited together. Finally, the door opened. Dr. Hayes walked in, removing his surgical cap. His face gave nothing away at first. Nate stood, breath held. He made it, Hayes said. The procedure went as planned. He's stable. Nate didn't realize he was crying until he felt Jayden's hand on his arm. You can see him soon, Hayes added. He's going to need time, but he's strong. He's got a chance. Nate exhaled, knees nearly giving way. When they walked into the recovery room later, Liam was pale, but his breathing was steady. The machine still beeped, but the tone was different, less urgent, more rhythmic. Jayden stood at the edge of the crib, hands in his pockets. Hey, he whispered.
You did it, little dude.
Nate rested a hand on Jayden's shoulder. Yeah, he said. He did. But deep down, Nate knew they all had. Not just Liam. Not just the surgeons. They had done it together. A man who had nearly lost everything.
A boy who had nothing left.
And a baby who had more fight in him than anyone could have imagined. And for the first time, Nate stopped fearing the next heartbeat. He welcomed it. 2 weeks after Liam's second surgery, the house on Sycamore Hill began to feel like a home again. Liam had been discharged 3 days earlier, brought home with a monitor, medications, and a stack of instructions that covered nearly every hour of the day. The nursery, once left untouched after Emily's death, had finally been used. Nate had reopened the door, unpacked the blankets, washed the tiny clothes, and filled the room with soft light and warmth. It was no longer a shrine to grief. It was a space for living. Nate took turns waking for the nightly feedings, sometimes groggy, sometimes smiling, depending on how many hours of sleep he'd managed. Jayden, surprisingly, offered to help. He didn't change diapers, I draw the line there, he had said, but he would sit in the rocking chair and hum while Liam dozed, giving Nate brief moments of rest. Their days slowly fell into rhythm, doctor visits, paperwork, short walks outside, meals that were rarely on time but always shared. In the quiet between tasks, Nate worked with an attorney to begin the official adoption process. It would take time, the lawyer warned, especially considering Jayden's history in the system. But it could be done. It would be done. Still, even with the forward momentum, Nate couldn't shake the weight of something unfinished. Not guilt, he'd come to understand that guilt alone changed nothing. But responsibility. The kind that didn't end with one good deed or one child rescued from the cold. There were others out there. Other Jaydens. Other families lost in the margins of paperwork and profit. And so, late one evening, after Liam had fallen asleep and Jayden was curled up on the couch with a comic book, Nate opened his laptop and began to write. It started as a letter. Then it turned into a statement. Then it grew into something more. By morning, he had a full speech. He reached out to a friend from the tech world, someone with connections at a TEDx affiliate in Denver. A week later, he was booked. The event was held in a small auditorium downtown, filled mostly with professionals, students, and a handful of journalists. Nate stood on the stage beneath a single spotlight, his hands steady, his voice measured. He told the story, not just of Liam, but of White Pines. Of negligence. Of the systems that allowed children like Jayden to vanish without question. He didn't spare himself. He named his failures aloud. He made no excuses. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the applause began, not thunderous but sincere. Jayden watched from the back row, arms crossed. He hadn't wanted to come at first. What's the point? He'd asked. Saying sorry on a stage doesn't fix anything. But he came anyway. And when it ended, he didn't speak right away. He waited until they were outside, walking toward the car under the early evening sky. You didn't have to say all that, Jayden said finally. I did. Jayden glanced at him. People might treat you different now. Business stuff, Investors. I know. Jayden nodded slowly. Good. They drove in silence for a while, the Denver skyline shrinking in the rear-view mirror. Back home, a letter from the Department of Child and Family Services waited in the mailbox. Nate opened it at the kitchen counter while Jayden made microwave popcorn. He scanned the document. They approved the preliminary placement, Nate said aloud. Next step is the home study. Jayden didn't look up. That the part where they ask if you have smoke detectors?
En checky fama psychopathe.
Jayden smirked. You'll probably pass. Over the next month, Nate's story began to spread. The video of his speech was shared online, viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Some praised his honesty. Others criticized him. Too little, too late, they said. But Nate didn't respond to the comments. He hadn't spoken to be forgiven. He'd spoken to be accountable. And out of that moment came something unexpected. An idea. With the help of his legal team, a few trusted colleagues, and a non-profit consultant, Nate began the process of launching a foundation, the Clara and Liam Foundation for Housing Accountability. Its mission was simple but urgent: provide legal and structural support to families living in at-risk buildings, hold landlords and property managers accountable for code violations, and offer emergency assistance to displaced families.
It started small.
A donated office space. A part-time staff. But the momentum was real. And every step forward felt like something solid in the face of a past that had once been built on shortcuts and silence. One afternoon, Nate brought Jayden to the foundation's new office. It was still being set up, bare walls, folding chairs, computers waiting to be plugged in. Jayden walked through slowly, hands in his hoodie pockets. So this is the redemption arc, he asked. Nate smiled.
No.
This is the responsibility arc. Jayden stopped at a desk near the window. You think it'll work? I think we have to try. Jayden nodded. Can I help? You already are. That evening, back at the house, Nate was rocking Liam in the nursery when Jayden stepped in. I talked to the social worker today, Jayden said. She said the adoption could be finalized by the end of summer. Nate looked up, surprised. That soon? Yeah. She said the judge fast-tracked it. Said something about unusual circumstances and your public accountability. Whatever that means. Nate chuckled. It means someone thinks I'm trying to make things right. Jayden leaned against the doorframe. You are. They didn't say anything for a while. Then Jayden spoke again. People at school don't know what to call you. Some ask if you're my dad. Nate met his eyes.
What do you say?
I say, not yet. But he will be. Nate smiled, heart full. Later that night, Jayden placed a framed photo on his dresser. It was one taken by a nurse at the hospital, a candid moment of Nate holding Liam while Jayden stood behind them, one hand on Nate's shoulder. It was the first photo of all three of them together. Not a traditional family.
Not by blood.
But real. And that finally was enough. The house on Sycamore Hill had changed. It wasn't the furniture, though some had been moved around. It wasn't the paint, though a fresh coat now brightened the nursery walls. It was something harder to define, something quieter, a shift in energy, a pulse beneath the wood and brick. It no longer echoed with grief. It no longer sat in stillness. Now, it breathed. In the evenings, the porch light was always left on. Not because Nate forgot to turn it off, but because Jayden insisted. In case someone else like me ever walks by, he'd said once. They should know someone's home. That light became a symbol, not only for them but, slowly, for others too. It started with letters. Some came from families living in housing complexes that had recently received safety upgrades thanks to the Clara and Liam Foundation. Others came from kids in the foster system who had seen the TEDx talk and felt, for the first time, like someone understood the cracks they kept falling through. Some were handwritten, others typed with shaky grammar and oversized fonts. Many ended the same way, thank you for seeing us. Then came visitors. Community leaders, housing advocates, journalists, some skeptical, some inspired. Nate met them all. He didn't pretend to have answers for everything. He only promised to listen. To use what resources he had to make change happen, even if it was slow, even if it wasn't perfect. And through it all, life at home continued. Not always smoothly. Not always quietly. But steadily. Liam grew stronger with each passing week. The doctors were cautious but optimistic. His heart was still fragile, but it was working. He smiled now, wide, toothless grins that filled the room. He responded to Jaden's voice before anyone else's. He liked the sound of comic books being read aloud. He laughed at Nate's failed attempts at lullabies. Jaden started school full-time that fall. The first week was rough. He didn't talk much. Kept his hood up. Avoided eye contact. But slowly, he settled in. His teachers said he was quick to learn, better with numbers than words, quiet but thoughtful. He didn't tell many people about his past. But he did tell them he had a little brother at home. That always made him smile. One weekend in early October, the family went hiking together. Just a short trail near the outskirts of Boulder. Nate carried Liam in a front carrier, while Jaden led the way with a hand-drawn map. They didn't make it far. Liam got fussy, and Jaden tripped over a root and scraped his knee, but they laughed the whole way back. That night, sitting around the dining table with leftover pizza and an unfinished jigsaw puzzle, Nate looked at the two of them and realized something strange. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he had to be in control. He didn't have to prove anything, or build anything bigger than what was already in front of him. He just had to be present. Present for Liam's feedings and Jaden's homework.
Présent for the late night fearen the small, everyday victory.
Present in the kind of life that had once felt too ordinary to desire. Later that winter, the adoption was finalized. The courtroom was quiet, the process procedural. The judge barely looked up as he signed the papers. But when he handed them over and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Cole. He's your son now," Nate felt something crack open inside his chest, something he hadn't realized was still locked away. They went out for pancakes afterward. Jaden ate 3 stacks. Liam threw mashed banana on the floor. Nate watched them both, smiling quietly, memorizing the moment. Not long after that, Jaden was invited to speak at a youth panel hosted by one of the partner organizations from the foundation. He was nervous. Said he didn't like microphones. Said he didn't know what to say. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to," Nate told him. "But if you speak from the truth, they'll listen." So Jaden stood on that small stage, hands in his pockets, voice low but clear. "I used to think being invisible was normal," he began. "Like the world was designed to not see kids like me. But then someone saw me. Not because I asked them to. Not because I did anything special. Just because I was there. And they chose to look closer." He paused, took a breath. "I didn't save a baby to get adopted. I didn't stop breathing when my family was gone. And I didn't start healing because someone gave me a house. I started healing when someone gave me a place. A name.
A chance to mater."
The room was quiet when he finished. Then, like at Nate's TEDx talk months before, the applause came. Gentle.
Real.
Back at home that night, Nate hugged him. "You did good." Jaden shrugged. "It was okay. It was honest. That's more than okay." Time moved on. There were setbacks. Liam caught a respiratory infection that landed him back in the hospital for a week. Jaden got suspended once for punching a kid who made a joke about foster care. Nate had to take a call in the middle of the night from a board member threatening to pull funding over his public statements. But through it all, they remained a unit. A family.
One night, on the anniversary of Emilie's death, Nat lit a candle on the porch.
Jaden sat beside him, Liam asleep inside.
"Do you still miss her?"
Jaden asked. "Every day." "You think she'd be mad? That it's not just you and Liam?" Nate looked at him. "She'd be proud. She always saw what I didn't." Jaden nodded, looking out over the hill. "Sometimes I think, maybe it was supposed to happen like this." Nate didn't believe in fate. Not really. But he believed in the power of one moment to change everything. One breath. One choice. One boy standing at the edge of a porch, pointing to a baby everyone else had written off.
Inside, Liam stirred.
Jaden stood. "I'll get him." As the boy disappeared into the house, Nate leaned back in the porch chair, the candlelight flickering beside him. The porch light was still on. It would stay on, every night. Because someone out there might still be wandering. Still hoping. Still waiting for someone to see them. And if they ever found their way to Sycamore Hill, they'd know. This was a place where second chances lived.